Thank you very much for coming, everyone. I guess I'm plugged up, the mic's working and everything. Well, to pick up where this gentleman left off, this is Mars. As of today, it is 243.3 million miles away. It is the only place in the solar system that has the survival necessities for human life. It is the only possibility currently for another branch of human civilization. Who cares? Here, that's a bad place to ask that question. But if you ask it any place outside UCI today, you're going to get a pretty disappointing answer. Most people, if they think about Mars at all, they think of it as a cold, lonely, desolate waste of time, waste of money, a distraction from other priorities here on Earth. And there's a lot to think about here on Earth other than Mars. Good stuff, fiddly stuff, other stuff to think about. But why should we care? You saw all sorts of groups here today talking, or not just today, but throughout the conference, talking about STEM education, STEAM education. There was an entire day on where the workforce of the future is going to come from, the engineers. Where's all that going to come? Why isn't it there? Something as exciting as this and no one cares, but suppose you could inspire people about that. Suppose you could take a kid that's 10 years old and let them dig through the sand of Mars looking for life. Suppose they could watch a sunrise on Mars, or eat a meal in a hab, or drive the rover around, right? What would the dreams be like then? There's no way to actually, no one big answer for that you're going to inspire people. All the things that we've talked about today, planetary participation, not going to happen. There's no one big answer for that, but there's lots of little answers. And I'm here to talk with you about one of them. The next giant leap is a proposal for a Mars museum, a complete simulation Mars museum that would travel around the country, science museums, science centers, that would put people on Mars in person. It's about inspiration, about seeing what Mars is like, but more than seeing what it's like, experiencing, getting the dream in your head. Everybody here who likes Star Trek. Not just Star Trek. What about the Apollo program, the Russian space program, the space shuttle, all the things that we looked at when we were kids and inspired us? That's what this is about. It's got a couple major areas, and some of the stuff you're going to see is fairly advanced. Some of it's a little bit sketchy. It's kind of in progress. Has a couple major areas. The Mars Dome is going to be the central part of the thing. Has a HAB, a MAV, and several support exhibits that travel with it. These support exhibits are going to give you the nuts and bolts necessary to understand the mission. Highly interactive. They say, tell me I'll forget, show me I may remember, involve me and I'll understand. An interactive exhibitry like this is the kind that brings people in and makes them think about it. In situ propellant, you can be talking about molecular debonding and chemistry for 8-year-olds who can be playing with an exhibit and learning about this. The history of space flight. It can be a space flight from Gagarin to today, or it could be a human exploration from the dawn of time till today. It tells you how to put these things in place. Seeing the actual hardware. There's nothing more exciting than a freaking rocket. And in Apollo, people built, I remember having a little shampoo bottle that was a command module, and I kept it until I was like 40. The interactive exhibits give you the details about it, but that's not going to inspire you. The Mars Dome is what's going to inspire you. You enter through the HAB exhibit. That's a fully functional HAB unit. You leave through the MAV exhibit, which is where you'd be leaving on the real thing. But in the meantime, you get to explore hydroponics, rovers that take you around, spacesuits that you can either wear or have located on the surface, actual sand on the floor, red sand, actual mountains, projections on that dome. There's off-the-shelf domes that they can do full interior projections. Here's the HAB. cutaway of all the things. It's a scaled down version that indicates everything that the astronauts would actually be using to get to Mars. The exterior of the HAB. The MAV sits there, ready to go. Here's a little look inside the Mars dome. You'd be able to take a rover around to each one of these little exploration areas, places where where experiments have little areas for them to go to, little pockets. The rover may come to here for one task, go to here for a further task, for instance, recovering the Curiosity rover. That might be something we do on Mars. Medical experiments that can only be done on Mars can be going on in the HAB. Mining, geology experiments, all these interactives for people to do to put them in the situation. And that's really cool, but it's not the cool part. The cool part is this. This museum, day to day, 9 to 5, it's on display at the Science Museum. We're working with OMSI in Portland, Oregon, one of the world's largest creators of interactive museum displays. 9 to 5, this thing's on display, kids are running around, whatever. Once a week, though, it gets a little bit different. After hours, they shut it down. For 8 hours, people go in sim on this. A school, for instance, I'll use that as an example, can field a team, 4 astronauts, 2 mission controllers. They design their own Mars mission from a menu of possibilities. There's going to be some things they have to do. They're going to have to take care of the ship. They're going to have to build the base. They're going to have to set up the solar panels. They're going to have to do all these things. Then there's individual things that work within the 4 astronaut specialties, botany, mechanics, whatever. There's going to be things that they have to do like sleep, eat, and exercise. There would actually be time in sim for them to sleep where they got to go to their cabin and sit there for 15 minutes. Landing on Mars, that's the big thing, the flag and footprints. But you would actually have a full simulation for this team starting up from the actual launch on Earth, full computer video simulation, all the windows in the HAB, computer screens that can be taking advantage of computer animation, show the launch from Florida. You actually see the clouds whizzing by as you go into space. You see the ship turn. You see the stars move. You feel the ship vibrate from the effects in it. Make it all the way to Mars, if you do. You make it all the way to Mars. You have full, it's about 3 hours transit and about 5 hours on the surface. All the way through various tasks you have to do on the surface. And the simulation ends 8 hours at the docking in Mars orbit for the return to the Earth. Space travel is dangerous. Nothing is guaranteed. And nothing's guaranteed on this. Every crew would face threats, random threats, asteroid strikes. They maybe not face all of them. Asteroid strikes, radiation spikes, computer failures, whatever. They can end the mission. If they decide to go flying off to Neptune or if they decide to vent all the oxygen on the HAB, sim over, game over. But they're scored on this. And there's a competition then between the various museums, various teams, and whoever wins gets scholarships, which this would easily spin off enough money to make scholarships. That's not the cool part. This is the cool part. The big prize, thanks to the generosity of Mars Society, they're willing to open up the Mars Desert Research Station for a week for the winning team to go and live in sim on Mars, the closest you can get on this planet. We figured that is a fairly beefy prize. Sponsorship, as with any space progress, depends on funding. We see this as a combination of the Mars Society with their generous outreach, a large main above the title sponsor. I know Dassault, Lockheed, Boeing, they're all here at this conference. I will buy you dinner if you want to be the thing. We'll talk about that. But you have a large sponsor, but then the sub-level sponsors, and we also look at crowdfunding, crowd investment, and grants. So a combination of funding sources. We're also working with a group in Portland, Oregon that is leading the way on crowd investment. One of 16 states that allows crowd investment. They're tied up with this. So we're looking to really push that through. But that's it. that's the next giant leap in a nutshell, and I'm sure we're going to develop it through their questions and everything. But it's the next way to inspire people to go to Mars. It's a way to bring them the dream that's in all of us. And questions? Thank you.
I think it's a great idea. Are you going to do this like city-to-city exhibits?
The basic, the way it is looking at now is that the way we're developing it now is that each museum would take it for a 3-month rental, and then it would cycle at another museum. We'd ideally have 3 copies of it touring at any one time. So at 3 points in the country, we're covering a good spread of the country. And yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. Yes?
When will it be ready?
Well, we're saying 2 years. It's a little bit tighter than the typical development time on an exhibit of this caliber. This is about a 4,000 to 5,000 square foot exhibit. OMSI says that that's about a 3 to 4 year development time, but in talking with them, they said, as far as it is now, 2 years is very reasonable. So basically, it's a question of getting funding to get started on it.
Yeah, I really like this. I would like to see it extended with showing some of the things that we can really accomplish, especially some of the things that's written up in the Mars Homestead project on how to start supplying the things you need to build so that you can supply all human needs.
Well, the question on this is not really how to fill out all the stuff in it, but what to cut in order to actually describe it. I mean, Mars exploration touches on every aspect of human thought, from art and religion and architecture to physics to science to chemistry. Anything you can imagine can be tied to Mars. Of the things that, let me back up here real quick on this grid. There's certain things that they have to do, but each one of these would be a mission module that they could choose. For instance, yesterday, I think it was, somebody was talking about looking for subsurface water using electrical conductivity. Easily abstracted for an interactive exhibit. You can have a kid go out, banging a thing here, banging a thing here, and if they do it right according to spec, they get scored on it good for the simulation. But they've learned that it's possible to look for Mars by banging rod, or look for water by banging rods in the ground. Anything that you want to talk about can be abstracted, and this is leaving 100 different experiments or mission modules that they might choose. The question is just filling them into which ones.
I've heard so many people say, well, there's no air there. There's no water. I can't go cut down a tree and make a log cabin. Why?
All the trees have been cut down for you.
There's nothing we can do. And if you showed the Mars and some of the projects I'm talking about, even if it's just a display, I think that they would start to say, okay, this is a place we can, I mean, there are very few places in the world that we can live that we don't have to have technology.
Absolutely. Danny was talking about space and ocean. Those are frontiers. How many people think if you were to ask 10 kids in high school that they're going to be able to name a frontier, much less 2 of them? And look what a frontier does for a society. It's a place where people have to dig deep and find new resources in themselves that they never expected, never knew. Ways that are going to surprise every one of them. You don't get that in a static society where everybody's bumped up against each other, there's nowhere else to grow, and now you have to live by regulations because otherwise you end up annoying everybody that you're bumping elbows with. The news that there's a frontier that is available to children and adults, that's big news in itself.
For a better future.
If they walked away with no other message, that would be sufficient.
What is the sponsorship to get going, but the continuous funding model? Will schools pay? Will teams pay?
Schools would not pay. Well, they could. And when it gets down to that granular detail, that's far beyond what we have sitting up. But right now, what I'm considering on this is that kids would not be paying, schools would not be paying, but they would have to qualify. And that's another big message of this, is that wanting to go to space is not sufficient. You have to earn it. A school might have 300 kids that want to go and play in the space sim for a week, you know, or for an evening. That ain't going to cut it. They've got to take a test to qualify first, and then of those who qualify, they each have to take a specialty test and qualify for a specific specialty. So if a school has 200 people, 4 are going to the Mars, 2 are mission controllers.
You might want to make it so that the museums that are going to rent the thing, you might want to suggest that they contact schools that might help pay for that rental.
Although, yes and no. In some of what you're saying, that contacting schools is something that the museums don't do now. Interactive science museums, and this is going to return to your question to answer yours too. Interactive science museums see a drop off at age 13. It no longer becomes cool to go to the museum. This is a way for them to reach out into late middle, even early high school, and actually build a bridge that they aren't doing now. Even if they're not counting on the schools for funding, or on the schools for funding, that's fine. They're expecting to pay large amounts of money to take in exhibits like this. They're expecting to make large amounts of money. OMSI, when I talked with them years ago, was under orders, they said, to put a space museum and a dinosaur museum on the floor once a year, because that puts feet in the door. And this is unlike any other space exhibit they have ever seen. When we talked with them about it, they said, well, what are your thoughts on the space exhibit that we just toured? And it was a really nicely done exhibit. A lot of, some interactives, some really cool stuff, you know, spacesuits behind glass and everything, some less exciting things, but it was a whole bunch of individual, disconnected space hardware things that lived in their own separate world. This is a story. This is something that brings you in a unified way.
They're probably museums of what happened in the 50 years ago, not what's happening.
Well, science museums
tomorrow, 10 years, and 50 years.
No, the interactive science museums are exactly not that. It is not some stale and dusty space. It's a place where kids go and get dirty, where they can tear things apart. A hugely critical part of this would be the outreach for what kids do at home, experiments that they can do. There's all sorts of curricula that have been written by various groups here at the Mars conference. Each one of those would be adaptable to a unified thing that could go out there. And it makes it, they're called museums, but they're even changing that. They're called science facilities now. And somebody mentioned edutainment. That's what they're looking at now. Yes, ma'am.
Have you contacted some of camps like the Galileo Science Camp?
I have not.
Because we have one in San Jose area, and they sent kids to the Tech Museum in San Jose to do some of some of the campers went there for however long, you know, a week or two. And the Galileo Science Camp puts some of these on every summer in that area, over a wide area.
Yep. And I think there's so many of them that do things like that have their own space museums or, you know, space exhibits within the museum. OMSI does.
To the Tech
Sure.
Museum is what I'm saying,
Sure.
where they can do one of their camps there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's
Summer camp.
we're looking at in 5 weeks. There's a convention of all the science and technology museums across the country. It's the one they all go to, and we're looking at being able to present there. But let me bring up something a little bit more tight on that. I'm sure everybody's familiar with Space Camp. Space Camp does precisely this. They put kids in sim doing the full mission design, full mission execution, as tight as they possibly can to space flight. But it requires multiple buildings, dedication of huge amounts of staff, dedication on the time of the students. You know, what, 6 weeks for Space Camp and everything? It's not accessible to the large population of the country. Although these could tour internationally, this will be seen by millions of people in a 15-year lifetime across the country, around the world, if you want to go around the world with it. And every one of them is going to be brought into the dream.
I heard something that I found very interesting just in your talking. I wanted to bring it up a little bit. You said the qualified to enter. And when I heard that, what came to mind was all the in-school activities you could do before anybody even touches this. That you could have programs in the schools.
Yes.
And then the winning team becomes the sports team almost.
Precisely.
That would be your rallying cry. You would see other schools compete.
Precisely.
And that could be that when you know, just like a sporting event would be.
Precisely. And think of just like a space program, it's not the astronauts and it's not the mission controllers. Think who else is with it. A school newspaper can be covering the team. Their mission can be live streamed on YouTube for consumption by the school or competing schools. The people who, oh God, I'm trying to think of ways you could do this in the, suffice it to say, a school could find ways to participate beyond just the 4 members of the team. And this would make that easy because different experiments, different mission modules could be plugged in to accommodate those other things. I mean, is there, yeah.
I've heard there's an exhibit in Las Vegas called the Mars Dome that I know almost nothing about. Do you know something?
I have
about
not heard
how it
about that.
contrasts?
I haven't heard about that. I've heard, as I said, there's a lot of places around the country and around the world that have their own space exhibits. But looking at, there's a database of, if not all, at least 90% of the rental exhibits in the world. Nothing like this exists off the shelf now. This would be totally innovative in the field. And yeah.
What kind of staff are you going to need to put this into operation? I mean, it's going to go to a museum. The museum's responsible for all of this?
No.
Okay.
No. And that's one of the real values that OMSI brings to the table is their decades of experience in exhibit logistics, exhibit planning, the crews that go in,
Okay,
set it
they're
up,
gonna be
take it
crews.
down.
Okay,
Yes.
all right.
So actually, installation and takedown is handled by professionals. On display, we want the staffing to be absolutely minimal because museums don't like to pay docents, and one can understand why. On display 9 to 5, I see very minimal staff, if anybody at all. I've designed a lot of interactive museums, and always the goal is to get it where the kid can be left alone while the parent goes and sits and ignores them. That's safe. It never actually works out that way. Usually there's a couple people that need to be involved with it, but we want it to be very minimal. On the actual sim, when they close the thing down, we're seeing that there would be one adult advisor who would also have to qualify from the school that would be part of the team, and then there would be one representative of the museum or the company that is promoting the exhibit, but one neutral representative that would essentially be behind the scenes as the kids go through the sim, being dungeon master, scoring them, observing their performance, making sure nobody gets hurt, but from a God perspective, from outside of it. There's some things can be done with without docents, others can't, but we want it to be as minimal as possible. For instance, if you look inside the Mars Dome, you might have maybe somebody walking around in Marvin the Martian costume or something to make sure nobody gets hurt, but there's none of the things that we're envisioning that actually require adult help. Now, if we've got a rover that's moving around the surface, that's something to be careful about. But how many kids are out there with their little electric cars that their brother got for Christmas? And if you have this thing moving at a half a mile an hour, which is what it would take. If you're going to do a trip to here, you want it to be a long replication of a Mars rover trip. So they're going G. That's the nature of Mars flight, But it also keeps it safe for people playing around, and you can always lock these things down for display versus how they're run in sim. One of the things about the HAB, this right here. You put 4 kids in a can for 8 hours, they're going to need a can. You got to have a toilet. and that would be necessary for SIM, but you don't want an open toilet while you've got it open for everybody else. That toilet can be locked down and sealed, and we've already got a company that has offered to sponsor the toilet exhibit on it. So it's interesting there. Exactly, and that's what the company is. It's a composting toilet company.
Charles, I think your idea is wonderful. I think
Thank you.
this is just it has so many facets to it on promotion, education, exposure, which is what we really need, I feel.
Thank you.
But I was thinking, well, first of all, wouldn't it be great to have this in place of football for schools and competition? So we wouldn't have the injuries and all. And also discovery museums, like in Indianapolis, there's a fabulous one there. I don't know if you thought about going into discovery museum.
That would be the prime market for it,
And
is
also
ones like
as a
that.
satellite to your idea, maybe have like a bloodmobile that would travel around the United States.
And that's, that even goes further because, a 5,000 square foot exhibit, there's not every science museum can carry that. There's a gallery size, and it was sized based on that because that's the size that the biggest ones can take, and we figured go big or go home. You can always do something smaller, but this is what we want to do. But you can do smaller satellite exhibits based off of it that go to the smaller museums. For instance, in Portland, OMSI is a big thing. Up in Olympia, there's small science museums up in Olympia. Salem has one that would never be able to get this, but if you could make just a copy of the HAB and have that something set up in their parking lot for a 1-month display, that's going to be bringing them in on that, and that's going to be a way for the museums to connect and make outreach connections between those. And I've got 5 minutes. Let me take one more question. I had some giveaways I wanted to give away to people. So yes.
Me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I was wondering, Apollo's cool thing was that it was actually real, not a simulation. Could you make it a little bit more real by connecting somehow with those guys that fly actual rockets, actual manned space flight, make a connection there somehow?
I think that's going to be one of the real advantages of it. When let me see. There's a lot of blank cells in this right here. And I filled in, a couple of them from the Mars conference this week. Exciting experience that could be put in it. But I see one of the big advantages of this is, for instance, Arizona State has a big space program, space education program. Reaching out to universities, reaching out to private industry, and finding out what they would like to add, what kind of experiments they'd like to do, reflecting what they're doing in reality. I think brings that element of realism you're talking about much higher. And again, it's ways to reinforce the connections between the Mars Society, to inspire people about space. Yes, ma'am.
One second question. I mean, this was fascinating, but is this a business or is it a nonprofit?
Right now, it's nebulous, and that's one of the things is we're looking at somewhere between 1.6 and $2 million to research, develop, and build this thing. If somebody gave me a check for $1.6 million, I'm likely to go to Bora Bora and live like a king. So one of the things with OMSI is that working with OMSI gives us the potential to have a shell that would actually be able to accept money and somebody that's assured that they're not going to go running off with it. But whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit, it's really, we're not that far along the lines to be able to determine. And my company, which would be the one developing it, may not be the company that actually takes it on the road and looks after it for the long term. And Shark Tank would be very good on that. Let me do a quick giveaway here. We have buttons for the project and also some very cool buttons from the March for Science. But I've got two artist signed prints of the March for Science buttons. And let me see. See if anybody. I started off the presentation with Mars's current distance from the Earth. Does anybody remember what the current distance from Mars to the Earth is?
123,
What was that?
123?
No.
300.
No.
267.
Closer. No, nobody paid attention. There you go. You win. 243 million miles. And I tell you what, I'll ask one for fun here because we're all Star Trek fans, and I don't expect anyone to get this. If not, we'll move on to another one. Does anyone know Spock's blood type? No. Nope. Close though. T negative. All right, so that won't count. Who can tell me the company that we're working with to develop this, the Science Museum in Portland? And you win the second one.
I happen to be a member.
There you go. Oh, congratulations on that then. Thank you. I would love to talk with anybody, any more details that you would like to know about it. If there's anything I can tell you, please ask. If you'd like to be signed up, we have a book here. Please will stay in contact with you. The website for it is marsleap.com. So if you want to go out and check it, there's some information about it there. Right now it's kind of more of a teaser site. There's a little bit about this, more about the kind of museums that we've done in the past and how we actually approach museums. But as we move closer, we'll keep you posted if there's a Kickstarter that we plan, crowdfunding, various project milestones. That's where we'll be putting everything. But thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate your interest, and thank you.